let's switch gear a bit. We have some questions from Twitter, so I'll read them up and then you can answer long or short, whatever you want. So, what is the most common reason when customers churn, or say it in a more easy way, stop using Pexip?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that we have seen is as I alluded to earlier in our discussion on that customers are consolidating onto some large industry platforms. I think we are definitely seeing network effects on Teams, to some extent on Zoom, on WebEx and Gmeet. Luckily for Pexip, that has not been a major part of our growth over the past 2 years either. So for us, it's a relatively smaller piece of our business, but it's certainly an area where we're seeing more churn than in the use cases where we are unique. And I think that's a fairly general point in a lot of software, is that in the areas where you can be unique and where you can sort of at least either be the best one in the world, or at least aspire to be one of the best, you are much more competitive than in areas where you are simply one of many. I think for Pexip, the other big driver that we see is that we have much higher churn amongst customers that are small with Pexip, because those are either customers that are using multiple platforms at the same time, and so it's more likely that they can opt to another platform. And then some of them will opt for Pexip and then become a larger customer over time. And also, I think our whole value proposition, go-to-market, and business processes are really geared towards being great with the large enterprises. It's not really neither a technology or a sales motion which is really adapted to small and medium businesses.
Next one is very specific, but I'll try it. How many % of new sales staff is still working at Pexip after 12 months?
Ooh, great question. I think if I look at, bit of the backstory is that since the IPO, we have really hired a lot of people, especially in sales and marketing, to supercharge our growth. For us, that was the core premise of the IPO, was to take the unit economics and the sort of business model that we had validated and really scale that up faster than what we could do on our own cash flow. So we've hired a lot of people over the past 18 months. If you look at the team that was here, that we hired in 2020, I think in sales and marketing, in total, roughly 15% or so are still have now left the company. Which is in part then people leaving on their own accord, but it's also then individuals that weren't really a great match with Pexip, and where we've found a sort of a common decision that it's better for them to seek opportunities elsewhere.
How do you find that balance when you're, I don't know if blitzscaling is the right word, but aggressive growth? How do you find that balance between the churn of the employees as well? Because there has to be a balance there. I mean, you can't go all the way on one side.
No, for sure. And I think when you're really scaling fast, it's the recruiting process is probably even more important than when you're scaling at a more moderate pace. Because at the end of the day, you really need those people that come in that to be really great, because you don't have the same level of both an experienced team that can help onboard them, nor a manager that is probably needs to sort of scale up several new hires as opposed to just one. So I think that's the hiring process is really super important in that type of phase, because you need to find great individuals. Then you will from time to time miss. I think it's important to recognize that regardless of how great your sales process is and your recruiting process, there will from time to time be people that aren't that aligned with the organization. And then having the ability to detect that early on and to find good solutions is important. Because in the end, I think both Pexip as a company and individuals that aren't that good of a match, we will both benefit from discovering that early on in the process as opposed to later on.
It makes sense. Next question is sort of a follow-up question, but it's about when are you seeing that the sales capacity is fully up and running to the desired capacity?
So I think for us, we see that it takes, we've said in the past that it takes between 9 and 12 months from when you join Pexip to when we're seeing sales results at the level that we would expect. In those 9 to 12 months, a lot of the work is around building pipeline. It's around being both learning the product and then starting to work those opportunities from start to close. And as we touched on earlier, that's, especially in large enterprise, is a process that takes a bit of time. I think we're seeing now that it takes closer to 12 months and probably somewhat above that as well, which I think is in part a consequence of us scaling at a much higher pace. So I think part of that responsibility is almost to give them the necessary support, but it's also I think a trait of sort of the society in general now with the pandemic, where doing business takes a bit longer, both for customers to decide and to implement the solutions that they choose.
The next one is about the cloud video interoperability. Will it still be as important in 5 years' time? Is maybe a more strategic question.
Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting question, and I think for the since Pexip really started with interoperability, it's always been a question. So surely this can't be a solution 5 years down the road. And then now 9, close to 10 years later, it's actually even more important than it was in the past. So while I think that the exact use case that we're solving now, so standard-based video rooms into Microsoft Teams as a platform, that use case is probably less relevant in 5 years from now than it is now. But by then, I think there will be other platforms and other use cases that really need that type of interoperability. Because what we're seeing is that both the level of innovation within the different video platforms has never been higher than it is now. And they are sort of intrinsically motivated to not work that well with each other, because at the end of the day, it's more important to create stickiness and reasons for the customer to stay within your ecosystem than to really work well with other ecosystems. And that is one of the, talking about sustainability. That's really one of the areas where Pexip finds a lot of value, because we are also humble enough to realize the practical difficulties that a lot of our customers face, and good enough to find good technology solutions to those problems.
Just the last one. Maybe it sounds a bit brutal, but I think it's interesting regardless. Just I think the question was, why can't Apple just buy Pexip or the same capabilities if they wanted to? But that's maybe talking a bit also about the competitive landscape and the big players and Pexip being a smaller player, etc. But
yeah, I think while in theory anything in software can be done if you throw enough people and money at it, what is truly unique about Pexip is our ability to be delivered both as a software service, but also as a dedicated software, which requires a completely different type of development methodology than if you're developing a cloud service. So while you, with a cloud service, can iterate on something as you go, and if you detect problems, you can fix them in your backend, and that fix will be available to customers the next day. If you develop a software package, you really need to make a product that can live on for years without anyone touching it. And I think that development methodology, together with one of the most extreme test regimes that you will find in the software industry, is the reason why Pexip is so successful in serving large enterprises with a dedicated software. So that part, I think, is very difficult to retrofit, and it's difficult to take a cloud service and then try and repackage it into a software that you can send off. The other unique part of Pexip is really the aspect around transcoding. So taking in different types of media streams, repackage those so that each individual can receive something that they understand, because the dialects of video are slightly different if you're using Zoom or Teams or a video system, and there Pexip is really, really good. So having that ability to do transcoding without meaningful latency which also means that you can add in a lot of AI things in the cloud as opposed to doing it on the laptop, is really, really hard. So it's really sort of hardcore engineering and a lot of mathematics that have gone into building that algorithm. And while it's, I will not say that it's impossible for others to do, there is a reason why companies such as Google or Microsoft have come to the conclusion that it's better to partner with Pexip than to try to develop this themselves. And that also speaks that it's to the fact that it's not a certainly not a trivial sort of technology feature to add.